I still remember the way she said it. Not with anger, not with yelling, just casually, over breakfast, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. "You'd be lost without me," she said, smiling. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was soft, almost affectionate, but it cut deeper than any fight ever could. I sat there, staring at my coffee. My name is Daniel. I've spent years building a life, earning every penny, sacrificing late nights and weekends so we could have more. And yet, in that single sentence, she made me feel invisible, like someone who existed only to support her, not to stand beside her. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I just nodded, swallowing the words that wanted to burst out. There was no point. Saying anything now wouldn't matter. She spoke with the quiet authority of someone who believed she controlled everything. It wasn't the first time she had done this. Little jokes, subtle digs, casual comparisons. But this one, it landed differently. It echoed. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. She didn't see me as an equal. She didn't respect what I had built. She didn't even consider that I might be more than she allowed me to be. And maybe for the first time, I realized patience, silence, and careful observation could be more powerful than anger. Because this wasn't about proving her wrong in that moment. Not yet. This was about watching, learning, waiting for the moment when the world would see the truth. And I would. My name is Daniel. Every morning, I wake before the sun, brew my coffee, and check the accounts for the day. I've always believed that hard work pays off, not just in money, but in stability, in respect, in peace. Our life looked perfect on the outside. A cozy house, well-dressed kids, dinners with family, small vacations when schedules allowed. People would say, "You've got all." And in many ways, we did. I earned. I saved. I sacrificed late nights, long hours, and even my own dreams so that everything ran smoothly at home. I believed supporting her meant keeping her happy, keeping the family intact, keeping the balance. But the balance was already uneven, though I didn't see it clearly at first. She had a way of taking the lead without asking, planning our weekends, making decisions about money, about friends, about family events, sometimes before I even had a chance to speak. And I let it happen. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was easier this way. Little things began to shift. Subtle remarks when I talked about my day. Quiet comparisons. The occasional joke about how lucky I was to have her guidance. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was sensitive, that it was normal in marriage. Still, I continued. I kept earning, kept supporting, kept giving. The small sacrifices felt natural because I loved her. But love, I realized slowly, shouldn't feel like invisibility. There were mornings I would catch her laughing at something she said to her friends about me. How Daniel works hard, but can't make a decision without her. I would sip my coffee, smile politely, and nod. Quiet, observant, patient. At that point, I didn't know I was training myself. Not for revenge, not for confrontation. I was learning to see clearly, to watch without reacting, to measure everything she assumed was hers to control. Because patience would later become my greatest weapon. At first, it was small. Little remarks she thought I wouldn't notice. Comments about my income, about my choices, even comparisons to other men. "Did you see Mark bought that new car? Must be nice to be him," she'd say, almost laughing, glancing at me. I would smile, nod, and keep quiet. Inside, it stung. Quietly, deeply, she started making decisions without me. Planning family trips, booking expensive dinners, choosing renovations for the house, all while I quietly funded it. She never asked. She assumed I would simply comply, and I did. Then came the public moments. Family gatherings, casual chats with friends. She would casually announce things like, "Daniel's lucky I'm around to guide him," or "I had to step in because he wouldn't know what to do." I felt my pride shrink a little with every word. But still, I didn't correct her. I let her believe she had the upper hand. Even at home, subtle mockery crept in. The way she would sigh when I brought up a suggestion. The way she would laugh softly at my mistakes in front of the kids. Small, almost invisible, but relentless. And with every remark, every dismissal, a quiet anger began to grow inside me. Not loud, not explosive, just steady, controlled, observing. I started noticing patterns. How she thought she was untouchable. How she assumed her words had power simply because she spoke them. How no one, not even me, questioned her authority. And in that realization, I found a strange clarity. Every insult, every subtle humiliation was teaching me something. About her, about me, about what patience and quiet observation could achieve. She believed she was in control, that I would always stay in my place, that I would never challenge her. And that belief, that assumption, was going to be her biggest mistake. Because sometimes the quietest men are the ones who plan the loudest truths. It happened at her sister's dinner party. The room was filled with family, laughter, clinking glasses, and the subtle weight of expectations. I had spent the entire week preparing for a presentation at work, proud of a project I had poured myself into. But in that moment, none of that mattered. She decided to make it about me. You know, Daniel here still can't figure out simple things, she said, casually, loud enough for the room to hear. I had to step in, of course. Otherwise, we'd still be waiting. There was a ripple of polite laughter. A few eyebrows raised. I felt the heat creep up my neck, the tight knot in my chest. I wanted to speak. I wanted to defend myself. But I didn't. I sat quietly, watching her smile, watching everyone nod and laugh along as if my efforts were invisible, as if my existence was just a punchline. She didn't shout. She didn't rage. She didn't even pause. Just that calm, confident smile. I realized then that this was her power. Not authority, not love, not respect, but humiliation. Subtle, controlled, and effective. She knew exactly how to wound without leaving a mark. I took a slow breath and looked around the room. Nobody seemed to notice the tension I felt. Nobody saw the man sitting there, quiet, defeated on the surface, but inside, calculating. And for the first time, I understood the full scale of what I had been ignoring. This wasn't just a joke. This wasn't a passing comment. This was a pattern, a belief that she owned the space I occupied, that she could diminish me publicly without consequence. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't beg for respect. I sat in silence, taking mental notes, observing, feeling the weight of her arrogance. And in that silence, I made a decision. Patience would be my shield. Observation would be my weapon. And one day, the truth would speak louder than her laughter ever could. Because she didn't realize the man she thought she controlled was already planning a quiet reckoning. After that night, something changed in me. I stopped explaining. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. At first, it felt unnatural. Old habits die hard. I wanted to speak, to clarify, to remind her and the world of what I had done, of what I had earned. But I didn't. Not anymore. Instead, I watched. I listened. I measured every word she said. Every smirk, every laugh, every subtle jab. I watched how she interacted with family, friends, and even strangers. How she assumed control without asking. How she believed she was untouchable. Silence became my armor. My patience became my strength. Every time she tried to provoke me, every time she mocked me quietly in front of others, I remained calm. I let her words hang in the air, unchallenged. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't a submission. It was a strategy. I realized that reacting gave her power. Fighting back, proving myself in the moment, would only feed her need to dominate. I spent hours thinking, planning, and observing. I reviewed our finances, our assets, and our agreements. I noted her patterns, her overconfidence, her assumptions. I studied how she thought, how she moved, how she underestimated me. And with every observation, a quiet confidence grew inside me. The man she assumed was passive, indecisive, and dependent. He wasn't who she thought he was. In the silence, I began to reclaim my mind, my strength, my sense of self. The anger that once burned hot and loud had cooled into focus. She kept testing me. Subtle pushes, quiet threats, the occasional comment meant to wound. And every time, I stayed silent, watching, waiting, because I knew that true power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It prepares. And when the time comes, it moves quietly, but decisively. I had learned the most important lesson already. Silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes, it's the first step toward a reckoning that no one sees coming. It didn't happen all at once. It crept up quietly, like the first rays of dawn. I began to see things clearly, how she truly saw me, and how much she had taken for granted. She thought I was weak. She believed I would always accept her control, her jokes, her subtle domination. She assumed that patience meant passivity, that silence meant submission. She didn't realize I was learning, watching, and understanding her every move. I reviewed everything she assumed she had power over. The finances she thought she controlled. The property she assumed was hers to dictate. The decisions she believed she could make without consequence. Every assumption she made was an opening. And then it hit me. She had never truly checked the paperwork. She never questioned ownership. She never realized the contracts, the investments, the legal details she assumed she knew weren't what they seemed. She had been acting from confidence, from arrogance, from habit, not knowledge. Every mock, every laugh, every comparison had been her undoing. Every time she assumed I couldn't act, I acted silently, in research, in preparation, in observation. The weight of it settled inside me like a calm storm. I wasn't going to fight her in the noise. I wasn't going to prove myself in anger. I was going to let the truth speak. Let reality reveal itself in ways she could never control. For the first time, I felt no fear. No resentment, not really. Only clarity. Only the quiet certainty that the game had shifted without her realizing it. She believed she was untouchable, that I was powerless. And that belief would be her greatest mistake. I smiled to myself, not because of vengeance, but because of understanding. I finally understood the rules, the pieces, the opportunities she had left open through her own arrogance. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. Patience had brought me here. Observation had taught me the path. And now it was time to plan. I didn't rush. I didn't act on emotion. I knew that real power doesn't come from impulse. It comes from preparation. I started with the facts. Numbers don't lie, and paperwork doesn't forget. I reviewed every financial record, every account, every investment I had built over the years. I looked at ownership, at names on documents, at responsibilities that had quietly stayed with me while she took the credit. I kept everything clean, legal, transparent, no tricks, no shortcuts. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to protect myself, to restore balance where it had been taken for granted. Emotionally, I stepped back. I stopped seeking her approval, stopped reacting to her moods. I spoke less, listened more. Every conversation became information. Every demand became a clue. I consulted quietly, not to complain, not to accuse, but to understand my boundaries. What was mine? What was shared? What was assumed but never confirmed? And the more I learned, the calmer I became. She believed control came from words, from confidence, from presence. But real control was written in ink, signed years ago, and ignored by someone who never thought she needed to check. I didn't change my behavior outwardly. I stayed calm, reliable, predictable. That was important. Overconfidence grows when nothing seems threatened. I let her believe everything was still in her hands. At night, while the house slept, I planned quietly. Not revenge fueled by anger, but correction guided by truth. I didn't want drama. I didn't want chaos. I wanted clarity. Because when the time came, I didn't want to raise my voice. I wanted to raise reality. And reality, unlike insults, doesn't fade. It started with a demand, not a request, not a discussion. A demand delivered with the same confidence she always used. She wanted control over a major decision. Money, property, something she believed was already hers to command. She spoke as if my role was already decided, as if my consent was just a formality. "You'll handle it," she said. "You always do." I looked at her and nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted to see how far she would go. That's when she pushed harder. She brought up divorce. Not seriously, not emotionally, just as leverage, a tool. "Without me, you'd have nothing," she said calmly. You know that. The words didn't hurt anymore. They confirmed everything I had already learned. She truly believed I had no ground to stand on. She believed fear would bend me the way it always had before. Then she did it again, in front of others. A quiet comment meant to embarrass me, meant to remind me of my place. She smiled as she said it, confident I would stay silent like always. And I did. But this time, the silence wasn't patience. It was permission, because I realized something important in that moment. She had crossed the final line. Not by insulting me, but by underestimating me one last time. She thought threatening loss would weaken me. She didn't know I had already prepared for it. She thought embarrassment would control me. She didn't know I had already detached. I went to bed that night calm, clear, certain. The test was over. She had revealed exactly how much she believed she owned me. And she had done it willingly, confidently, without hesitation. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next move wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic. It would be final. I didn't announce anything. I didn't warn her. I didn't raise my voice or change my tone. When the moment came, it felt almost ordinary. That was the beauty of it. We sat across from each other, papers on the table. She was relaxed, confident, already speaking as if the outcome was decided. She talked about what she would do next, what she expected, what she assumed was hers. I let her finish. Then I slid the documents forward. Slowly, calmly. She stopped talking. Her eyes moved across the pages. Ownership, accounts, signatures, dates, details she had never bothered to read. Details she never thought she needed to understand. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. The truth was written clearly, without emotion. Everything she believed she controlled, she didn't. The assets, the decisions, the structure of our life. It had always rested quietly in my hands. Her confidence cracked, not loudly, just enough for me to see it. She looked up at me, confused, then defensive, then afraid. She asked questions, sharp ones, urgent ones. I answered calmly, fact by fact. No anger, no satisfaction in my voice, just clarity. For the first time in years, she wasn't leading the conversation. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't mocking. She was listening. And I realized something in that moment. Power doesn't come from dominance. It comes from preparation, from understanding, from patience. I hadn't taken anything from her. I hadn't tricked her. I hadn't humiliated her. I had simply stopped letting assumptions replace reality. The room felt quiet, heavy, final. She finally understood what silence had been hiding. Not weakness, not fear, but control. And when I stood up from that table, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced, because the truth had done what words never could. It had spoken for me. After the truth was laid bare, the house felt different. The air felt heavier, charged. She paced. Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. Questions flew, sharp and confused. I didn't realize. I thought. She stammered, trying to grasp what had just happened. I listened. I stayed quiet, calm, patient. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood the value of control without chaos. She tried to bargain, to negotiate, to regain the upper hand. But the rules had changed quietly, irreversibly. She was no longer steering the narrative. She was reacting, and she hated it. I didn't gloat. I didn't taunt. I simply answered. Facts, clarity, truth. Every assumption she had made crumbled quietly under the weight of reality. Her panic grew with each passing hour. Little gestures betrayed her. Tight fists, anxious pacing, the way her eyes darted to paper she hadn't read, numbers she hadn't checked. For the first time, she realized that confidence without knowledge was fragile. And through it all, I remained steady. My calm wasn't arrogance. It wasn't satisfactory. It was quiet strength, built over years of patience and observation. Every humiliation, every mockery, every dismissive laugh had led to this moment. She had assumed silence meant submission. She had assumed patience meant weakness. And now, in her panic, she realized just how wrong she had been. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to make a scene. Reality had done the work for me. And in that calm, I felt a shift. Not revenge, not anger, but balance. The world had corrected itself. And I had remained steady while it happened. Because true strength isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It is quiet, controlled, and undeniable. After the storm passed, life felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just clearer. The subtle tension that had hovered over our home for years had lifted. Not because she admitted fault, not because she apologized, but because reality had spoken. I didn't hate her. I didn't seek revenge and anger. I didn't want chaos. I simply respected myself. And that respect changed everything. Every day, I moved with a quiet certainty. The decisions I made were no longer shadowed by doubt or fear of her disapproval. My voice mattered. My choices mattered. And she could see it, whether she admitted it or not. We continued our routines, but the imbalance had shifted. She no longer assumed control. She no longer laughed at subtle jabs. She learned, quietly, that patience, preparation, and calm can outweigh arrogance and noise. I realized that true respect doesn't come from demanding it. It comes from embodying it, from living with integrity, from being consistent, from refusing to let others define your worth. I had given her nothing she didn't already deserve, but I had taken nothing for myself. And that simple truth reshaped the way I existed in our shared life. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer a passive observer in my own home. I was a man who had endured, observed, and finally reclaimed his place. Not through anger, not through loud confrontation, but through patience, strategy, and self-respect. And in that calm, quiet moment, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. Freedom not from her, but from the fear, the doubt, and the constant undermining that had once defined my life. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I only needed to live with clarity, with dignity, and with the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth. And that, I realized, was more powerful than any words, any argument, or any act of dominance she could ever throw at me. Looking back, I understand now what really mattered. Not the arguments, not the humiliation, not the attempts to prove myself in the moment. Those were distractions. What mattered was patience, observation, understanding the truth beneath the noise. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean submission. Sometimes, silence is the most powerful response. I learned that people will always underestimate what they don't see. They assume what they cannot measure is worthless. And if you let them, they will shape your world with their assumptions. But that doesn't mean you are powerless. True strength comes from preparation, from quiet awareness, from the ability to act decisively when the moment is right. It is not about revenge for revenge's sake. It is about restoring balance, respecting yourself, and reclaiming control of your own life. I also learned that respect can't be demanded. It can't be shouted into existence. It is earned through consistency, integrity, and quiet resilience. The man who reacts in anger often loses more than he gains. The man who waits, who observes, who plans, he wins in ways that words alone cannot capture. And finally, I realized that patience is not just a tactic. It is a way of life. It allows you to see clearly, act justly, and live with dignity. It turns humiliation into clarity, mockery into opportunity, and silence into power. So, if you take anything from this story, let be this. Your value is not defined by someone else's words or assumptions. Your strength is not measured by how loudly you fight. Sometimes, the quietest man, the one who watches and waits, is the one who shapes reality itself. In the end, life rewards those who master themselves before they try to master others. And that lesson I will carry forever.